isn't it? So you guys can go take a break. If you've not been here before, we divide this up, and so the adults get the first break session. So go to the annex, get you something to drink, something to snack on. Go back over here, and I'll do the annex.
Are we expecting anyone else to come to the class? Well, I'll give them a moment. If you are here in the class now, you'll be turning your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 19. Chapter 18 and 19 is where we'll do most of our discussion from. And again, we have some that are kind of moving slow. I'll give them a moment to get here. All right, it's time to start. Tonight's lesson basically deals with Elijah after I'll call it the contest he had between the prophets of Baal, and what happens to Elijah afterward. And we read the text. When we read the text, we'll see that Jezebel wants to kill him, take his life. Remember that she supported the prophets of Baal. Elijah slew them. He killed them after this great contest that we talked about a couple of nights ago. And she basically says, I'm going to take your life. I'm going to kill you. And we see Elijah reacting in a manner that it's taken some people back, but I think there's a valuable lesson to learn from this. When you look at every indication, it appears that Elijah was depressed. I think he was tired. I think he was ready to die. And again, we will look at these in detail in just a moment, but it certainly fits the perception of depression. I think he was depressed. And we see how God deals with that. And that's the value of our lesson tonight. I want to ask you questions to start with. Let's say, men, your wife comes home, she's been somewhere, and she tells you about her day, and she says, I met some man, and he was just strange. That man wasn't normal. How would you what do you think she meant by that? That man was strange. That man wasn't normal. If your husband told you that, ladies, what would you think? Now, think about it. I'm trying to make a point here. What would you think? What is normal? It's not a loaded question. My point is, there is a norm of behavior that is consistent with all of humanity. And when someone is acting strange, or we say that that person is not normal, we mean by their behavior, it's not in the norm. Now, here's where I'm going with that illustration. God created man after his own image. God created him, male and female created he him. And it goes on to say that we were made after the image of God, after a likeness of God. Not that God is a spirit. What does it mean we are made in the likeness of God? I think it means that we are made in his likeness in the sense that we can reason, we can think, we can be rational, we can express ourselves in emotions. All of those different qualities and attributes. But yet there are people in our world that are different. And I'm going to this place even from the mental perspective. Most of you know our grandson, Jensen. He's autistic. He is 4.5. He'll be 5 in February. and he can't complete a sentence or he'll say a few words, and we hope that in time he will be able to communicate better. He does say a few words, but it's certainly not normal, okay? So we realize that some things, while God created us in the normal fashion, I think the majority of mankind, we are what we would call normal. We can behave in this norm. But there are individuals in our world who, and I don't mean this as slang, but are mentally retarded in various forms, in various ways. And then we get into the concept of depression, things of that sort. Again, we're all different. There are people who are more prone to things like depression than others. Panic attacks. Some people, are prone to those. I've never said a whole lot about it, although I think I have mentioned it from time to time. But for me, in my personal life, this winter, along about December, January, there's less daylight. It's getting dark at 6 o'clock in the evening. It affects me. I've told Connie many times, I said, I'm scared. What are you scared of? Well, it's just this feeling that comes upon me, and I can't describe it. I don't know why. I never experienced that in the summertime when there's plenty of daylight. But it does affect me mentally. Now, I still function. But the only reason I'm bringing these things out is I don't think we ought to look at someone that is suffering perhaps from depression or whatever to say, well, they're just abnormal, that they're just not right. There's some issue with them. Even Elijah, this great prophet, and the things that he accomplished had some issues with this. I'll tell you this, and then we'll go into the text. When I was in college, 35 plus years ago, we were studying the Restoration movement. The Restoration movement follows all the history from a time from Christianity into Catholicism. Then you had the Reformation movement when people began to desire to reform the Catholic Church. And then that led to the Protestant protest, many different denominations that exist today. And then the Restoration movement, when preachers, back in the 1700s, some even starting earlier than that, began to read their Bible, and I can't read about this and that denomination and so on. Let's just be Christians. And I racked my brain today to remember I had to do a report on him. But it was one of the Restoration preachers. It may have been John Raccoon Smith. And if you know anything about John Raccoon Smith, he was actually born here in East Tennessee, Sullivan County in Blumpville. He was born in the 1700s. Nevertheless, interesting character. If you wanted something to do in your free time, read a biography of this man. He was born, had received very little education. Alexander Campbell said that John Smith, they called him John Raccoon Smith, but Alexander Campbell said that he was the only man he knew that college education would ruin. Because he received a very little education, he basically memorized a great portion of the scriptures and would preach with that knowledge. But anyway, as the story goes with John Raccoon Smith, he received a very, very little education. His parents were staunch members of the Baptist faith, and the Baptist church at the time was teaching that, following the doctrines of Calvinism, that in order to know that you're saved, God has to give you some experience. In other words, something, has to come in your life, and now I know I'm among the elect. And he said, I never received such. And they were kind of pushing him. He wanted to be saved, according to the Baptist teachings, but nevertheless, my point, he was honest in the point, well, I haven't received anything to know I'm among the elect, that I've been chosen. Finally, he convinced himself that he was. The church recognized, okay, well, we can accept you into our fellowship. And then he wanted to preach. And local preachers were telling him, God hadn't called you because he hasn't received. He admitted he didn't receive any type of miraculous, information. But finally, he started preaching anyway because he had this knowledge. And then he began to, the more he studied the Bible, he realized, this isn't right. Anyway, it goes on in his life. But I think it was John Raccoon Smith that was affected with a great deal of depression. He was a thunderous man, filled with logic, filled with just the things that people said about his teaching and his preaching was amazing. But if he is the one that I had to do this book report on, there would be periods of depression when he would have this great oratory skills, and then all of a sudden he's gone for a while. He's silent. And he's depressed. And then after a time he would overcome that and again reach heights that few other orators would ever achieve. But he had bouts of depression. So here we're going to learn about this great man Elijah and the depressions as it affected his life, as we see here. Okay, I mentioned earlier in 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah had the 3 years of drought. After that occasion, he said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If God be God, serve him. If Baal be Baal, serve him. And then they made the altars. If you were not here a couple nights ago, they have the altars depicted here. And remember how Elijah said, you prepare an altar for Baal, I'll prepare an altar for Jehovah. Whichever sends down fire, that's God. And of course, we know what happened. After, putting barrels of water upon this altar, soaking everything, he calls upon God. God ignites this altar and actually consumes the whole thing. And all the people said, Jehovah is God, Jehovah is God. Then Elijah takes these 450 prophets down by the river and he slays them. And we talked about why from the scriptures. You would think such a powerful man the events that are about to occur wouldn't affect him, but they do. All right, let's start reading. I've rambled enough. Chapter 19, verse 1. And Ahab told Jezebel, all right, stop for a moment. Who's Jezebel? Ahab's wife. Ahab is the king. Jezebel is a wicked woman, as you probably already know. But Ahab tells Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, so let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. On the surface, we think that's odd. Jezebel had already been killing the Lord's servants. Go back to chapter 18 for a moment and look at verse 13. Chapter prior, chapter 18, verse 13. Was it not told my Lord what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. Now, this was Obadiah that was talking to Elijah, but he says, listen, Jezebel, she's been slaying the prophets of the Lord. So the fact that Jezebel would have been an enemy to the Lord's people, that was no surprise. I'm confident after Elijah told Ahab it's not going to rain, and it didn't rain for 3 years, Ahab is looking for Elijah. Later here in the 18th chapter, Elijah presents himself to Ahab, and that's when he calls for this contest. But it shouldn't have been surprised that that his life was in danger. It had been in danger, I think. He had been in hiding. You remember we read earlier, I guess it was, Sunday, how that God took care of him first by sending him to the brook, and that's where, the ravens would feed him there. Then when the brook went dry, he sent him to a widow of Zarephath, and there, remember how they all ate from this bowl of meal that never ceased, the oil never ended, and so on. But now Jezebel says, I'm going to kill him. And he runs. I'm not trying to throw off on Elijah. Elijah was a great man. And when you examine his life, how, as I mentioned Sunday in one of the classes, you look back how his life is talked about even into the New Testament so many times. Elijah was a great man. Was he? I know he felt like he was the only one. Maybe he was just tired. But I think it's very clear when we read these events, he falls into depression here. Well, that's true. And the text does say he had a servant, verse 3. But for the most part, he was alone. There's no question about that, and I mentioned that a couple nights ago. But anyway, he runs. By runs, I mean he leaves. He goes out into the wilderness, a day's journey. Why did he go out into the wilderness a day's journey? He wanted to be alone. He wanted to hide, if you will. Look at his actions now. Verse 4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Do you think he meant that at the time? Well, I think he did. I think he was tired. It's enough. Take my life. Did God do it? Did God take his life? The answer is no. But I'm going to show you toward the end of our lesson that God did answer his prayer. Elijah did not die a natural death. Some of us were discussing earlier what this is above the pulpit, and it's anything from a hurricane to tornado to an ice cream cone. No, that's the whirlwind. You remember how Elijah, being in this chariot, if you will, how he was caught up into the whirlwind and God took him alive? God did answer his prayer, but it would be several years later. Verse 5. Here's where I think the depression, you begin to see this. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said, Arise and eat. People who are depressed, and if you look up depression, you begin to see the signs of it. You'll see these very things. He has no concern about living for tomorrow. He wants to sleep. He's isolated himself from others. All the signs of depression. But yet, here, I think the 19th chapter of 1 Kings gives us an answer to how to treat depression. Whenever we see there in verse 5, as he wants to sleep, an angel says, Arise and eat. Had he been eating? No. He wants to sleep. He's refusing or has ate very little apparently. He's isolated himself. But yet there's an angel that, in essence, that speaks to him, touched him, and by that I take it he awoke him and said, Arise and eat. I think the first thing when people are depressed is we need to convince them you've got to take care of yourself. Arise and eat. Look at the second thing. Verse 7. I say the second thing. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. Not once, but twice does he tell him, nourish your body. People who are depressed, I want to keep hammering this, so to speak. People who are depressed, they don't care anything about, I want to lay in bed of a morning. I don't want to get up. I don't want to face the day. I don't want to take care of myself. Men don't want to shave. Women don't want to fix their hair. I don't care. And God said, no. You get up and you eat. Take care of yourself. Okay? Then there's a second thing he says here, because the journey, latter part of verse 7, because the journey is too great for thee. There's work to be done. You might say get a job or whatever. People who are depressed, they don't want to take care of themselves. They don't want to. He says, no. Take care of yourself. Eat, because you've got a job to do. There's something yet for you to do. This is not the end of your life. Get up, take care of yourself. You've got a mission ahead. There is something for you to do. A task is at hand. Is it healthy for people, and I'll ask this question, is it healthy for people not to work? That can work. I'm not talking about due to age, due to one's mental faculties, I'm not able to work, or sickness. I'm not talking about that. We have no indication that Elijah was sick. We have no indication that Elijah had any, and I'll use this phrase, hindering cause not to be active. Is it healthy for people not to be active? No. One of the parables in the book of Matthew, Jesus said the master went out into the marketplace and he found some and he said, why stand you here idle all the day? It's not normal. And their response was, because, Lord, no man hath hired us. In other words, we're not working because no one's hired us to work. We can't find a job. And of course, in the parable, they were hired. But by the very question that Jesus asked, it was evident that our life is one of labor. Jesus was a carpenter. Tony, do you have something?
Just think about the difference between Elijah. Let's go to the New Testament. Let's look at Paul. Paul basically saying the same thing. You like being in it, right? But the reasoning is different. Elijah wants to get out of this mess. He wants to get out of this hardship. That's not the reason Paul wants to leave, because he saw there was a great need for him to still be here.
And said so, yeah.
And he was willing to work. And I believe the only reason he kept going crazy was his right, was his involvement in the churches and establishing the congregation. And after he was in prison, he still worked from that, in that in prison. He still worked for the church.
Mm-hmm.
So I think being busy really helps.
Oh, it sure does. As I said, Jesus, was a carpenter. Paul, what was his occupation? He was a tent maker, a tent builder. What about Peter, James, and John? They were fishermen. And we weren't talking about people who fished Saturday nights or evenings. No, that was their occupation. That's how they lived. The Bible speaks of one Simon, a tanner. Simon, on one occasion, was a sorcerer, another one. But there were occupations. People were busy. And it's healthy for us to be busy. I think we were designed to be active. I think it's good for us mentally to busy ourselves. So here he says, take care of yourself. There's a journey for you. Verse 8, and he arose and did eat and drink and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. So he gave him a job to do, if you will. There's something for you to do. But we see Elijah is still overcome with, I think it's depression. And God is going to teach him a very valuable lesson. Verse 9 through 13. And he came thither unto a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said unto him, what dost thou here, Elijah? Now this is pure supposition, okay? Why did he stop in a cave? God asked him, the latter part of that verse, "What dost thou here, Elijah? Why are you in this cave?" Why do you think he went to and stopped in a cave here? Any thoughts? Opinions? Why did he run the first place? Yeah, to be alone, to escape Jezebel. And I think here again we find this, even though he had gone some 40 days and 40 nights, he ends up going to a cave. He is alone there. He's hidden from danger there. And look what he says. Here's his response, verse 10. "And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." That's why I'm in this cave. Now, here's, I think, a very valuable lesson for us all to learn. Was it as bad as Elijah thought? He said, I'm alone. He said, I'm the only one. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy commandment. And he goes on to say, I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Was he the only one left? No. No, God would later tell him, there's 7,000 that hasn't bowed the knee to Baal. Elijah, you're not the only one. And here's the lesson. I think very often when people get down, they view things worse than what they really are. My problems are greater than any other one. No one else has these problems. I'm just overwhelmed. All these things on my shoulder has me just bent down, and you know, people don't understand. My problems are so bad. There's no way to overcome this. Why is it that we think our problems are worse than what they really are? I think so. And yet, we see this here. He viewed his problems as just being insurmountable. There's no use to even trying. All right, how does God treat that? I like this. Look what happens here. Verse 11. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And and after the fire, a still small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering in of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What dost thou here, Elijah? Okay. Realize who was in control. Can you imagine you're in Elijah's shoes? You're told, go up in the mountain, verse 11. The Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains. What does it mean to rent the mountains, the King James says? What does that mean? It tore it apart. I've never been near a tornado. I've never been near they call it straight wind sometimes. I've certainly seen the effects of it. I've been in areas where wind has been so great that oak trees, had just been twisted, limbs, big as my leg and larger, had just been twisted up. It's amazing the power of wind. I don't know what that sounds like. Imagine if you're there, you're Elijah, and you're seeing these events. The Bible says that the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent, it tore the mountains, break in pieces the rocks before the Lord. Not just the wind and the trees, but even rocks. And I don't think he's talking about, a rock that you might see like in our landscaping around the building. I think he's talking about boulders were just breaking. They were burst asunder. Nature has some of the, for mankind, whenever Jesus and his disciples were in that boat, and if you remember on one occasion Jesus is asleep, the disciples are fearing for their life, they're afraid, and they woke him up and said, "Lord, save us." And Jesus rebuked the wind, if you remember, when he said, "Peace, be still." And there was an immediate calm. Do you remember the reaction to the disciples? They were amazed that a man could even command, Jesus, and have nature respond. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have been there on that mountain, to have seen those trees in the mountain as it was torn, boulders that would have been ripped apart. And that wasn't all. The Bible says there in the latter part of verse 11, and after the wind, an earthquake. And after the earthquake, verse 12, a fire. God was showing him the awesome power, his nature, his ability. Here is Elijah thinking, I'm the only one and they're after my life. Look who's on your side, Elijah. I am the God of I am the God, the great I am. I created all things. I control nature. This wind that would tore the mountain, boulders coming asunder or breaking apart, the earth quaking, the fires and so on. Look who I am. And you're worried about Jezebel? Look who's on your side, Elijah. Things aren't near as bad as what you think they are. I think there's a lesson for us to learn. And there's times, and I don't care who you are, whether you're, as Tony, a gospel preacher, whether you're an elder, whether you're whoever, a Bible school teacher, song leader, it doesn't matter. We all have issues. Sometimes there's problems within our families. Our great enemy, death, has affected everyone here. Perhaps our parents, our siblings, grandparents, whatever the case may be. Death has come and stole those away, and it leaves us empty. We are hurting. Again, maybe we've lost jobs, and this has happened to us unjustly, or whatever the case may be. There's many, many reasons we can be down. But I think God's remedy here with Elijah, number one, take care of yourself. Number two, get busy. There's things to be done. Number three, look who's on your side. It's not near as bad as what you think. I am the great I am. There's someone much higher than me. And God was showing Elijah this. And again, to me, that's just a powerful lesson. And then I like how it ends. Go back to verse 9. Elijah goes to a cave. He's there in the cave. The word of the Lord came to him and said unto him, What dost thou here, Elijah? After giving Elijah all this presentation of the awesome nature of God, it ends in verse 13 the same way. And behold, the latter part of verse 13, the last sentence, and behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What dost thou here, Elijah? What are you doing in a cave? Who am I? What a great lesson. And again, he responds in verse 14. And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Same response that he gave earlier. Okay, guess what? There's more work to be done. So he sends him again. He doesn't allow him just to lay there and stew in his problems. He gives him a task at hand. And we see that. Verse 15, And the Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of I'm not sure I can pronounce that. Abel Meholah, that's probably not even close, but nevertheless, shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. Speaking of Baal the prophet. So once more, he gives him a task to do. Elisha, things aren't over. Your life is not at an end. There's still work for you to do. You can be effective. And he put him back to work. So even though there's times, as I said, we may be tempted to quit or whatever, look who's in charge. It's not near as bad as you think it is. Get back. Be active. I can't stress that enough. And that was the answer here. And he goes and he does those things. He goes, he finds Elisha. And I think if you read the text, Elijah was to be a mentor unto Elisha, to help him, prepare him to take his place. And if we go ahead and flip over to 2 Kings chapter 2 for a moment. 2 Kings chapter 2. Look at verse 11. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked. Now again, Elijah is with Elisha, his successor. That's who they're talking, okay? And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and took hold of his own clothes, and rent them into pieces. What a great man Elijah was. But even great people have flaws. Even great people can have difficulties. And we see that with Elijah. And I couldn't help but think when I read this verse, did God answer his prayer? What was his prayer initially? Take me. I want to die. I want to leave this world. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was afraid. But it wasn't that time yet. And notice he didn't die on his time. God took him when he was on his time. I've said this many times, and I believe it to be so true. For the most part, we have a temptation to be nearsighted. Now, I'm wearing glasses now, and they're just bifocals. The top part is basically just plain glass. But for many, many years of my life, I could see up close. And when I studied the Bible, I would take a pencil. Often you've seen these Pentel pencils on 5mm. You can click it, and I would sharpen those. Had a piece of paper next to me, and I would sharpen them. I always kept them sharp. And then I would make little notes in my Bible next to verses and stuff. Now I can't read them. But I was nearsighted. I could see up close great. But, if was looking Nicole back then, she would be, who is that? I'm not sure who that is. I couldn't see it far off. I was nearsighted. I could only see what was in front of me. Then I had LASIK surgery, and that's another story, and now it's the other way because of age. But the point being, I'm afraid in life that often we're nearsighted. I can only see what's up close. In our author, in the book, he uses an example of photography, and that is one of my hobbies. Connie and I, of course, we enjoy bird photography particularly. But in photography, there's three aspects very quickly. There is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And you got to have all three. All three serve a part in photography. But in aperture, if it's a wide open aperture, then you have a very shallow depth of field, okay? And that's the reason in bird photography we use the shallowest aperture that we can still have a sharp image, because it isolates the bird with the background. In other words, the only thing you see when you look at the picture, I can show you a lot of the pictures we've taken, and you can't see the background is blurred. You can only see the image. It makes it sharper, brings all of your attention to that one item. But then again, if you close the aperture down, then the more you close that aperture down, the more depth of field you get. You know, I can, depending on the lens, I can get the front chair in perfect focus, and I could also get David, who is sitting in the back, David Collins, in focus because of the aperture, okay? Well, sometimes we lose our focus. Instead of seeing the broad picture, all I can see is what's this close. I'm nearsighted. It's all I can see. It's just my problems and my difficulties. And as I said earlier, whether it be grief, whether it be, this has happened, I've lost my job. It could be 100 things. My health, my spouse's health, or our children, or whatever that may be. Or even sometimes marital issues or problems occur. Maybe you're doing everything you can, but your spouse doesn't care and wants to end the marriage. I mean, there's, again, hundreds of things that can come upon us. And I think we in general are bad about being nearsighted. I can only see my issues. And I wonder if that's not what happened to Elijah. And I think back when you see God presenting himself in this powerful manifestation of his greatness, look, your problems are nothing. It's 1 John 4 and verse 4, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Elijah, it's not nearly like you think it is. Take care of yourself. Get up. There's a task at hand. But I'm afraid we have a problem sometimes of being nearsighted. We can only see our issues. All right, I've rambled here for almost 40 minutes. Any thoughts or comments you might have? We'll go over a few more things. In our book, the author talks about isolation. Remember, if you go back to 1 Kings chapter 19, he leaves his servant and he goes alone. Go back to verse 2, chapter 19, verse 2. Then Elijah sent a messenger unto, that's not where I want to read, verse 3. And when he saw that, talking about Elijah, when he saw the threat of Jezebel, he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. He was alone. He didn't have to be alone. He could have stayed with his servant. Do we need other people? We really do. When God created Adam, it was the only thing that he said wasn't good. What was it? Yeah, he said it's not, Genesis 2:16, I think. It is not good that man should be alone. God knew that we needed companionship. Now, there are many people, we have all known people who appeared to be happy being single, never having a spouse or a mate or whatever, and, we're all different. Some people have chosen to live that way. But even then, they had friends. Have you ever, and I haven't seen this in a while, I don't know if it's still on TV or not, it's probably seasonal, but have you ever seen that program Alone, where they take people out into, depending on where it's at, maybe it's, on some coastal area, and there's no one else there, and he or she is to record themselves, and basically they go almost crazy because they become so lonely. And then finally they'll call and say, okay, I'm through. Come and get me. When you're sitting there in your living room, well, that'd be easy to stay out there a month. It'd be easy to stay out there 45 days or whatever. But Hi, Mr. Jensen. It's okay, no problem. That's our grandson. But we need people. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and I'll say this, and we'll conclude the class as other ones are coming in. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, I want to read this section to you here, a few verses, if I can get over there. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. You know what a beautiful text, showing us that we need others. I'll just tell you, if something happened to my wife, I wouldn't fare well at all. She would fare much better without me than I would her. Because we've been, as Jared used to call it, a thing, since I was 15 years old. I'm 61, I'll be 62 in August. Yeah, I mean, we've been together, not married that long, but we started dating when I was just 15. Can't imagine not having constant companionship. So we need others. And sometimes when, like Elijah, whenever things seem down, we seem to kind of draw in our shell. We want to go in our own cave, so to speak. And I don't think that's healthy. Do you think we have a responsibility to remember those who are widows or orphans or whatever as Christians? The Bible says we do, doesn't it? James 1, verse 27, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep himself unspotted from the world. I'm speaking in general terms now, okay? I think generally that's something we often fail in. And maybe I just need to talk about me. I often fail in. Sure, that word visit means not just to say hi, how are you, pat them on the back, but it also means to help. But I've found in my experience, often we are ready and willing to, maybe it's if they need something, we're ready to open up our wallet, but what about just sitting and talking? What about just a visit? Do you think we often fail at that? We get so busy living our lives, and we all have responsibilities, don't we? I mean, there's bills to be paid. If you're still working, as I am, I know several of you are retired, but I've got to be somewhere at 8 o'clock in the morning. I've got to rekey a mobile home, install a deadbolt. I mean, it's already something scheduled. I've got to do. I've got to be there. I've got to get up. I've got to go there. Then I've got to go to building 301, the State of Franklin building on MedTech Parkway. I've got to install a couple locks there and master key them tomorrow. I've got doing the big Mountain Commerce Bank just in Boones Creek there. I spent most of the day, or a good portion of the day there, after having master key locks, installing them and so on. I mean, we're busy. And then I come home, because then I looked at this lesson a little bit, and I'm ready. Now here we are, it's 8. We have schedules, and I'm not talking about myself in essence. I don't mean to do that, but we have things we have planned, things that are expected of us. But yet, I remember the day when I was young, when there was no internet. People didn't carry these little things on their sides. And, you'd drive through a neighborhood and you'd see people out on the front porch. How many people do you see out on the front porch now? Occasionally. Not like then. I don't know that all of our the things that we have to entertain us, whether it be the television or all these other things, are good for us because it takes so much of our time. And I think it has hurt us socially that we don't have time or don't take time to sit down with others and to help them. I'm confident that Elijah needed others, but he didn't. Again, the verse servant he did have, he said, "You wait here, I'm going." But we need others. Question for you. Remember Ruth and Naomi, the story, book of Ruth? Naomi, her husband, because of a famine, she leaves her homeland. They go to a foreign country. There, her two sons, marry. Her husband dies. Naomi's husband dies. Naomi's two sons die. She's left alone. She says, "I'm going back home." Both of the daughter-in-law said, "Well, we're going to go with you." And she said, "There's no more, my age, I can't bear more children. You're not going to have a husband for me. No, you stay here." What did Ruth say? Why did Ruth want to go with Naomi? Quiet class. I think Ruth realized that Naomi needed her. It's evident when you read the whole book that Ruth was of such an age that she couldn't go out in the field and work. As we've mentioned time and time, there were no social, governmental support. She didn't have a retirement plan. She wasn't old. She was too old to go out in the field to work. How is she going to, survive? Ruth said, "No, you're not going by yourself. My God will be, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. I'm not leaving you. I'm going to help you." Ruth saw that her mother-in-law needed her. I just think it's so important that we stop and reflect upon those things. And sometimes, perhaps we are all, or I'll just use me, I'm guilty of not seeing sometimes the needs of other people. Connie wouldn't like me. She don't like me mentioning her name. But Connie never really knew her mother. That's a long story. Her mother and father got divorced when she was just a baby. Her father, they were in Michigan, brought her down here, and of course, what does Dad do? Ends up with his mother, and basically Connie's grandmother raised her. Okay? Her grandmother, and she was converted. We did teach her after Connie and I, of course, we both became Christians later, and taught her, and she attended some at the old building, but she was basically blind. And when we're going to get married. There was never a time I got down on hand and my knee and said, "Will you marry me?" It was just something, we just started, we're getting married. And I said, "Well, where are we going to live?" And she said, "No, I won't leave Mom." "What do you mean you won't leave Mom?" "No, she needs me." Because she took care of her when, where else would she have went? I won't leave her now. So we did live there until she died. And I'll say this to that woman's credit, and perhaps a lesson for all of us, we ever find ourselves in a similar position. She never was a problem in our marriage. What I mean is, was there a time whenever David and Connie were having disagreement? Yeah. That woman never took sides. Even though I would have been wrong many, many times, she never spoke up and said, "Well, Connie's right." She stayed out of our affairs. Why? It was her house, because she knew why that woman was there. To help her, to care for her. So again, the lessons I think from Elijah here that we need to remember or to learn from, that as Elijah is down, he needed other people, and we need to be there for others too when they need us. Any thoughts or comments? I'm looking over this notes because that's for the most part all I have, and it's 5-6 minutes after, something like that. Let's go to the end of the book. Has some discussion questions, and I can see that you're dying to talk. What factors contributed to Elijah feeling depressed? What would you say? I mean, we've looked at it. Loneliness. Here, Elijah, thought Jezebel was trying to kill her, and certainly she was. But there's a lot of things. Loneliness, thinking, hey, I'm the only one. All of Israel has forsaken the true and the living God. I'm through. I'm done. I'm ready to quit. I think all those things would have been the point. Yes, very much so. And that's a good point, Brian. It did show the human side. When you look at what Elijah accomplished, I mean, this wasn't the contest here that we've talked about. That was a small part of his life. And yet you think what a courageous man he was. But yet, you're right. He was human. Well, there's some other things here, but I think I've gone over it, and I've mentioned this before, but when I was in school, one thing was taught and kind of stressed to us, that the mind can't absorb more than the bottom can endure. So you've sat here almost an hour. I'm going to let you have liberty until the classes come back, which is not less than 10 minutes, about 7 minutes. But I thank you for your attention, and for those who did make comments. So I'll leave this up to Jared here in a minute.